Well, Blessed Friday as we come to Genesis chapter 15. We're finishing our lessons in Abram and Sarai, who later became Abraham and Sarah. Abram was the father of a great nation. Abraham would be the father of many nations. But Abraham is having a point of doubt. And so the Lord is making what is called an animal covenant, a carcass covenant, where he had taken a few animals and he had cut them down by the spine. And usually people would walk through it as an example, just as the spine is the center of all mammals, including ourselves. It was saying if we break this covenant, it would be like taking our spine and ripping it apart. But it is also one of intimacy. Both parties go between the spines so that their agreement binds them together as one people. But right now, Abraham has only done the carcass separation. A deep darkness has come over it. And so we just skip over to verse 17 and 18. We're going to just focus on these two verses because this is the essence of what God does here. When the sun had gone down and it was dark, a smoking fire pot and a flaming torch passed between these two pieces. Remember, the spine had been separated and now a fire, the fire of the Lord, the presence of the Lord. You see the fire of the burning bush that we see in Exodus chapter 3, the fire of Mount Sinai and the revealing of the Ten Commandments. And we could go fast forward to Pentecost, the fire that dwells over all of God's people. All of this are examples of fire that binds things together. And so on that day, now remember, Abraham did it at night because that's the beginning of the Hebrew day. It was evening and it is morning. So our faith starts in darkness. Our faith starts in unsuring, wondering whether God is going to fulfill the promise. And then a deep sleep came upon Abram, the sleep of revelation. And on that day, the Lord made a covenant with Abram, saying, to your descendants I will give this land, from the Egypt to the great river to the Euphrates. And it goes on to all the other nations describing the land. Now, that would be very specific to the people of Israel. And to some extent, that is what Israel wrestles with today. What is the inheritance of Israel, the people that claim Jewish heritage? But for the Christian believer, and it starts with Habakkuk and going on to Romans 4, I'm repeating myself, and the reason I am because we need to make sure why Abram and Abraham specifically are our grandfathers, ancestors in faith, is because, as Paul says, and as Habakkuk the prophet says, faith in God's promise is reckoned to the one of faith as righteousness. You see, there are many other people that will add things to our faith. Some think it's specifically about going to church, and it's good to go to church, or reading your Bible on a regular basis, or praying a certain amount of time during the day. And I'll tell you, I've gone in and out of that discipline. It's a hard one to keep. But my faith is not based on my discipline necessarily. My faith is not based on my church going necessarily. Those are the fruits of my faith. But my faith is because I'm trusting in the promises of God. And that's what Abram, later Abraham, is trusting in. Now, Abram and Abraham, both of the same people, remember, struggle with that. They go back and forth. In fact, if you look at the main characters of the book of Genesis, you'll find them to be a little bit shaky in their, at least their personal piety of faith. Abram goes from strong trust to passing off his wife as his sister, as he did in Egypt, or we'll have this other thing where he'll do the same thing again. We'll also have the kind of the weak faith of Isaac, the one who is the son of the promise. at least as far as physical promise is concerned, but he's kind of a weakling throughout his whole life, and he's deceived by his younger son, Jacob, who is very conniving, and his connivingness leads him to getting a dislocated hip, and gives a new name, which is called Israel, the one who wrestles with God. But all of them are humbled as much as they are lifted up. They're humbled in their personal piety, in their religiosity, but are elevated in their faith in God's promise. And the book of Genesis ends with the story of Joseph, the youngest, the favored son of the 12. Yes, and in fact, Joseph's two sons, he's so favored, Joseph's two sons become ones that inherit the land. That's why there's not a tribe of Joseph. They are split in two by his sons. And so there is an extra blessing there, but it's not because necessarily of the inherited strength of all these people. It's their faith that makes them strong. Now, today is Friday, and each and every Friday, a Christian is to reflect upon probably the weakest moment in Jesus' life and his strongest moment. Its weakest is because he is allowing himself, the God of heaven and earth, incarnate, born of a Virgin Mary, suffered under Pontius Pilate, was crucified, died, and was buried, and he descended to the dead, or one could say he descended into hell. That's a whole other topic, but what it illustrates is that it is Jesus, God incarnate, at his weakest. But he trusted in the promises of God. And his example, just like Abram's, just like the other examples of the Old Testament, remind us that if we trust in the promises of God, even when it is darkness, as we are anticipating the light of revelation, God will come through. And God did make Abram's, now Abraham's, the father of many nations, descendants as numerous as the dust of the earth. That's from Genesis 13. As numerous as the stars above. That's from here in Genesis 15. And as numerous as the sand on the seashore. I believe Genesis 24. But it is later on, all three of them are examples of descendants fulfilling this promise. And Abraham and Sarah had physical descendants, but because they're the father of many nations, they had spiritual descendants. People who have faith in the promises of God. People like you and I. And it was this understanding of Christianity that inspired Luther and his Reformation. Rituals and good things and righteous things are okay. But what is even greater is what spawns them. It is not negotiating God with God's love. God's love is already negotiated to us. He is like, as we had on Sunday, the mother hen gathering its chicks. The question is whether the chicks, like you and I, are going to scatter and go all every which way. You see, on the second Sunday in Lent, we're to remind ourselves and to remind God, you have protected us. You have protected us. Will you protect us, Lord? And that's the challenge of this week. God bless you today. We trust that these continue to be words of encouragement. Remember, we have church on Sunday. It will be at 8:30 at Central, 10:30 at East, and we will experience our third Sunday in Lent as we travel these 40 days. Take care. God bless. We'll see you next time.